I'm very happy to welcome Joris Vlieghe and Piotr Zamojski. They are most of us well known by their publications, but some brief introduction on person. So Joris, he is Associate Professor for Philosophy of Education, Research, Education and Culture and Society at the University of Leuven. And he was before teaching at several British universities, Edinburgh, Liverpool, Aberdeen, and he's interested in the impact of digitalization on the future of schooling, the figure of the teacher, the meaning of educational practices, and sustainability education. Piotr, he is full professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science at the Polish Naval Academy in Gdańsk. And his research topics are hermeneutics, critical pedagogy, philosophy education, and post-critical pedagogy. And this post-critical comes together in their book, together with Naomi Hutchin, Manifesto for Post-Critical Pedagogy. And I know in the German discourse, it's translated in German. There was a big discussion on this, and perhaps we hear something about from this perspective as well. Both together had written another book, Thoughts on Ontology of Teaching, Think-Centered Pedagogy, Affirmation and Love for the World. So, and they had together some journal articles, Critique and Education under New Climatic and Digital Conditions, from a logic of division to a logic of gathering. So, I'm very happy that you are here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So, we are going to do this together. It is usually the case that Joris thinks when he walks, and I think when I sit. So this is not comfortable for both of us. You need to have that in mind. All right, so when we thought about how the world is conceived of today in an educational theory discourse, the dominant view would be the functional view, where there is nothing really intrinsic in the world itself. It is what is in the world is perceived through its function. So the world is a standing reserve, is a kind of container with resources that we must use as students to climb the ladder of the societal order, to take advantage of that resource and try to find the best position for our lives. So that's why education here in the dominant view is knowledge and skills acquisition necessary for that success. So quite recently, the reaction to that dominant view is the attempt to re-enchant the world, which would be to say, no, the world is not a resource, but it is a source of wonder. The world is something super interesting, and we can be enchanted by it or re-enchanted by it, and we must. I mean, education should stir imagination and sense of importance of things in the world. And we would add to that, sure, and we could say that it is precisely the functional view of the world that is responsible for the environmental catastrophe. So indeed we need to appreciate the world as enchanting, as something wonderful in the first place. So we need to rediscover the world as fascinating and enchanting reality that transcends our individual life projects and that call us to take care of itself. That would be something reasonable. And at first look, these two approaches seem to be oppositional. But they actually share something which we would like to stress today. That is understanding of the world that excludes the possibility that the world resists us, and that it does in a painful, sometimes painful and violent way. So if you look again at the functionality perspective, the world as a resource, resistance in that case is seen simply as a temporary and manageable malfunction, to the smooth operation of the perfectly orchestrated machinery of the world, where everything is functional to everything. Like everything that exists has a function that connects with something else. Within that world, within that kind of image of the world as a mechanism containing of parts that are purely functional towards each other, there is nothing to do except to fit in. The only possible task of closed off and perfectly orchestrated world is to fit into it, and therefore an emphasis on learning. The world is kind of fixed, and you need to learn to fit in. It's perfectly logical. So in the reenchanting the world position, that seems to be a bit different, because the world is a source of wonder, and wonder in itself could be regarded as a form of resistance. It is a surprise, something unexpected is happening, and it makes us wonder. So it is a confrontation with something that does not fit our presuppositions, our frames of understanding, our ways of expecting things would unfold, and so on and so forth. Still, we claim we are dealing here with something that is hardly a matter of painful and violent resistance. It's something to be enjoying, but not something that actually really disturbs me. So what is missing in both positions, we argue, is the very possibility of an encounter with the world that is understood as integral externality. So something that is not made of by us, not a human construct, but that is external to us, but in a way has its own integrity and independence of our will. So indeed there is, what is missing is a possibility of a collision between what we know of the world, what we want from the world, and the way the world kind of is or unfolds. And we would like to pursue with an example that Joris is going to explain.
Okay, so to make this a little bit more concrete, some of you will be familiar with this kind of new exposition. It's called Van Gogh Immersive Experience. And the point that we want to make is that if you go there, yes, you might really have a sense of wonder. It's a very wonderful experience. It's quite out of the ordinary. It might surprise you in many ways. But what is actually absent during this experience, during what we in German would call Erlebnis rather than Erfahrung, is that it is a pure enjoyment which excludes every possibility of the harshness of resistance. If you compare this to going to a museum where real Van Gogh painting is on the wall, the experience is completely different, because to begin with there will be many paintings. You will have to think about which painting am I going to look at. There will be things in the painting that are disturbing, that you do not immediately understand, things that you need to study, right? This is not, here you don't have the appropriate conditions to study Van Gogh and to be transformed by the paintings of Van Gogh. Here, there is no call to give Van Gogh a particular place in your life. This is Van Gogh being reduced to a bunch of maybe wonderful experiences. But what is excluded is the possibility of a painful encounter. Now, talking about encounter, we can refer to a text that has highly inspired us, which is by Friedrich Bonhoeffer, Begegnung und Bildung. Obviously untranslatable. Begegnung can be translated as encounter. Bildung is obviously untranslatable. The core of Bonhoeff's argument is that many schools within educational theory are not able to really get at the heart of a truly educational encounter, even not the notion of Bildung. The problem he decries is that very different theories, so we use the example of theories that normally oppose one another, like Carl Rogers. The goal of education is to get at the true authentic self, versus Kant. So the end of education is the possibility of self-determination in accordance with the law of the demands of reason. And we could add many more of these perspectives. All these perspectives, Bonhoeffer claims, define education as a matter of Entfaltung. So there is already something which is given, which defines where education has to go. It only needs to be entfalted. Development of an already core of selfness. This is not to say that you can completely predict what's going to happen, because entfalting is always in a dialectical relation with contingent conditions. But anyway, the core of the process is already formatted, and this is even the case, of course that's not Bonhoeffer, that is what we had, the case in blank slate theories ranging from Locke to neuropedagogy, where the whole path of education, Entfaltung, is already set.
Can I just jump in? So in all these concepts, indeed, we deal with the nucleus, with something that is already there, that then throughout the process of education need to be unwrapped. And that's the case also when the nucleus is empty and it's pre-designed by the educators or by the politicians. Then also education is defined as unwrapping of that nucleus. So the logic is still the same, and I think that in that sense it's genius observation of Bonhoeffer, that even when it's empty, it's still, so in that sense the idea that education is essentially a matter of unfolding is like it holds from Rousseau to neuropedagogy. It's like there is a very deep and very important assumption there.
Thank you. Now, of course, the main target of Bonhoeff's critique in that text is the Bildungs tradition, and there is here a longer quote. I'm not going to read the whole quote, but it's clear that he opposes Bildung with Begegnung, encounter. So the difference is one between Bildung, in which there is also a relation to Bildungsstoff, as he calls it, but in the end, the Stoff, so the subject matter, if you want, the thing of study, is somehow becomes part of the Bildungssubject life project. Whereas encounter, Begegnung, is always the harsh interruption of Entfaltung, the hard interruption of this process of strengthening of the self. Yeah? So I will only read what we put highlighted at the end. During the encounter with subject matter, the subject is to respond to the claim that confronts it in the encounter. It is to respond in an appropriate way, and the next thing is very important. What is appropriate is not determined by the subject, but by what is encountered. And yeah, let me just, I think I actually did not discuss this slide, so very shortly. So what is important in the true encounter, the educational encounter, is that the logic of Entfaltung gets interrupted. Bonhoeffer makes use of a very interesting linguistic argument. So when two trains pass one another on different tracks, so they cannot bump into each other, there is no Begegnung, but if they bump into each other, that could be Begegnung, right? Or when you go into town to meet someone on a pre-arranged time and place, that's not a Begegnung. But if, I don't know, I would go to Amsterdam and by coincidence I meet Malte there, it's a Begegnung because I would not have expected you to be there, right? So this idea of bumping against without this thing being planned, yeah, is crucial to educational encounter. Hence, the encounter is always somehow harsh, potentially painful, because during the encounter we have the experience of the Widerstandsfähigkeit and the resistance of the world. And he ends this argument by saying, well, what does this mean in pedagogical terms? Well, it means that we encounter things of study, for instance, Van Gogh paintings. His text is actually a reaction to a lecture by Romano Guardini, who speaks in his text about education as servitude to things. So it is only thanks to the resistance of the world that we experience that the world asks something of us. Yeah? So that was actually the last thing that I read. So it's the thing itself that sets the appropriate criteria of how we should respond. Yeah? So, and he ends then with the famous quote from the Rilke poem. So you should change your life. Du musst dein Leben ändern. So it is thanks to the encounter that we might give a meaningful transformation to our life.
Sure. And just a side dish, so as the Bonhoeffer text is very rich and complex, also the concept of building is very rich and complex, and so like we are not fully, as Bonhoeffer suggests, trying to get rid of this tradition. There is something that we are trying to do, but it's a work in progress. We are not going to present that here because we still need more studies, but we think that we can go beyond his critique of building and try to somehow re-establish the adventure parts of building that you can find in Bildungsroman into the concept of Bildung against Bono, but that's a side dish. We don't want to, just to note that there is something there and needs to be still thought through. All right, so coming back to resistance, of course, like with paragraph 16 in Seine Zeit, we know that resistance is not just a psychological feel or frustration, but it has an ontological mode, that when you are, that the world itself actually starts appearing only when you encounter resistance within, indeed, the perfectly orchestrated connections between the tools that you encounter. Some tool breaks, and you just cannot go on with the things as you planned. Only then the world really starts appearing. That's the way through. So the resistance is indeed very important, to say the least, ontological feature of our existence. So that is somehow also noticed in pragmatist tradition. And for example, in Dewey, when he speaks about acting as the way you actually learn things about the world, you can do that only when it's like whenever you act, you actually encounter a resistance of the world. That's when the things you plan don't work. But for Dewey, it's always the idea is to overcome that, to have another idea that will overcome the resistance and everything will be back in the order. But there is something in it. The resistance is important for the world to appear. And with this strange detour to pragmatism, we actually got inspired, but not. We are not proposing you going back to Dewey, but instead of that to James.
So, of all the pragmatists, James is probably the most phenomenological. This is something that is very interesting to go deeper into, how these two authors relate. Now, you probably see how we are constructing our argument. We take something like wonder as a good candidate to oppose the functional view, but then we say, but look, it's not the right candidate, need something else, right? Here is the same, like, okay, but surely you're not going to invoke William James in a conference that is about world and worldliness, because this guy is very famous for coining this term of the pluriverse, not the universe, with which he at first sight, or at least literally says, the world can be experienced in many ways, and in so many different ways that they do not add up in one block. And therefore, the conclusion might be that we have to get rid of the notion of the world, right? We also say, and the pluriverse is an open and multiple and never finished, so can always add new perspectives to the pluriverse. Okay, nevertheless, we're going to make a case that James is actually, or that James actually offers a very interesting ideas and concepts to speak about the world in an educational way, and also about resistance and painful encounter. So to begin with, James' philosophy is not a plea for relativism. On the contrary, it is not a support for subjectivism in the sense that we reduce the whole idea of world to subjective interpretation and everybody has his or her or their own world. In fact, the whole oeuvre of James can be read as a response to exactly this, right? So there is a human tendency to become prey to relativism, to skepticism, and the whole work of James is about regaining connection with the world. And in order to understand that, we have to understand what he means with the central notion in his work, which is experience, which he doesn't capitalize, but I do it for practical reasons to show that there's a difference between experience and individual subjective experiences in plural. So what he says, so there's also opening of essays in radical empiricism, experience is the stuff reality is made of. And with this, he tries to overcome a very long debate in modern philosophy about the question whether or not we can really get through at reality. What he very cleverly shows is that the distinction, so you can of course formulate the whole discussion in terms of, is the subject able to get through to objective reality, that subject and object are only two poles that first appear in experience. So they are not ontological separations, but they are qualities of experience, which might be an insight that comes close to phenomenology. So in that sense, of course, he doesn't call his position phenomenology, but he calls it second empiricism. Not the first empiricism of Locke, which from the very beginning makes a distinction between subject and object, and then because the problem is formulated as such, then the problem of the bridge between subject and object becomes a meaningful issue. So we should start from experience in which subject and object are given, in which object, reality, is, well, the way it is experienced. So reality is what it feels like. And I also have some nice quotes, so I'm also not going to read them all, but so the whole entry point into the discussion is that where Locke starts from sense data and then asks himself the question, but how can they be related, for instance, in a causal manner? We are never sure. In the end, we end up with subjectivism. What James very beautifully shows is that all these relations are actually experienced as real. And you can see he makes a difference between many relations, and one of these relations is resistance. Yeah? So it is part and parcel of, or fundamental experience with capital E, that we can actually experience resistance.
No,
maybe I should not do that.
You should not. I told you. I told you.
Resistance, you see, resistance in practice. Yes.
This is the difficulty of working with this guy.
Okay, so next time I shall do it there. Okay, so resistance is given in experience. I'm not going to read through all the quotes, but what he tries to show is that the sense of reality, so that we have a kind of idea of reality, what it means that things are real, and also that there is a world, is actually rooted in this basic relational experience of resistance, right? And it is this resistance and this sense of reality which then pushes us to become attentive for things. Now, this is not where the story ends, because you could still say, yeah, but in the end, doesn't this lead to kind of derealization of the idea of the world, right? Isn't he speaking about pluriverse after all? Well, when he says reality, when James says reality is never finished, we think that what he really wants to say are these three important points. These are really three important points for the educational part of our argument. So as I said, he really, with this notion of second empiricism, he wants to overcome the skepticism which is endemic to classical empiricism, so that we can have again faith in the world. A living trust that even under the many reasons that we have to doubt the world, that we still want to entertain a relation with the world, that we want to respond to this experience of resistance with the world. But this faith, James says, is also faith in the world's possibilities. So that reality is never finished means that in our experience of this resistant world, we also experience that the world is never finished, closed. The problem of a closed world is exactly that it either leads to pessimism, we know how things are and probably they're hopeless, or to a kind of very flawed optimism, and then there is no adventure. Yeah? So what James tries to think is a notion of possibility in a very strong sense of that word. We simply do not know, it's not beforehand knowable what the world can be. That's really the sense of this notion of pluriverse. So it's also part of the idea of the painful encounter or resistant encounter with the world, that there are always more possibilities than we would have imagined. And I think you will end.
I don't remember, but I can cover that one too. So, no, actually it was your, but I can do that. Yes, sure. Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So, in a way, that what we deal here with is the world that indeed resists us, and that in a way, makes the life difficult. The resistance of the world is indeed harsh and sometimes painful. And what we have from James is that indeed, when, how to put that, that it is the faith in the world that is possible only when you assume that the world is indeed infinite, that enables you to still engender an affirmative stance towards this world and its possibilities. So that doesn't come, yes, yeah.
Just to make it concrete, think of the Van Gogh painting and the difference with the Van Gogh immersive experience. In the Van Gogh immersive experience, what you experience, the Erlebnis, is completely fixed by the machines that are projecting things. Whereas when you truly go to the museum and study the Van Gogh painting, you never know what you will see. You can always still, because of the resistance of the painting, discover new things in the Van Gogh painting.
And that means that the faith in the world doesn't come by itself. It regards indeed a teacher, someone who introduces us to the things, parts of the world that as something that is of value in themselves, and he or she does that in a way that that enables or that allows for encounter, not for just simply being amazed, not in a way that makes people learn, but in a way that that makes encounter with something that resists us, and that's something that is really not just the projection of our will, of our cognitive schemes and so on, is there and demands something of us. So that leads us to the last slide, and some kind of attempt to respond to the conference theme. So what we had in this presentation was like 3 views on how we could understand the world with regards to education or in education. The functional view is indeed a world that is already fixed, that every part of it is structurally connected in a functional way to any other part, and so the only thing we can do is subordinate, trying to like functionalize ourselves. And today people, both pupils, policymakers, parents, teachers sometimes also do that as well. They try to think as what is happening in the classroom or what is happening at the lecture hall at the university as or laboratory as acquiring people with functionalities. You didn't know how to do that? After the training, you will know how to do that. You will be more functional, more advantageable on the competitive. That's the word I was looking for, on the job market and so on and so forth. So that will be one thing. There is a second idea of how the world may look like, is the enchanting view, where the world is indeed wonderful. and where we, and indeed, something wonderful can be encountered, but we still think that there's something missing there. The invitation to study is missing there. That wonder, you may be delighted by it, you may feel enjoyed by it, but we think that being touched and being forced to respond is something more. And indeed, the pluriverse term James suggested as indeed the world as something infinite with all its possibilities, like that introduces to the educational understanding the idea of faith in the world, that the pedagogues, teachers need to uphold in spite of the violent encounters that the world offers. And that is the world that it does not keep us like either subordinate to societal demands, nor just happy with the new kind of experiences that we just collect on a consumer basis. The world is fun, the world is the world is wonderful, but it keeps puzzling us, and it disturbs us, and in that sense, the only thing that really would keep us all going in trying to make sense out of it, of the unexpected and unintelligible things we encounter in the world, is indeed the faith in it, that there is some sense afterward, that we can do it, that there's, although now, today, I am just completely dismantled, I still want to pursue that. I think that there is something behind it, and I want to know it, although I'm aware it's infinite, I'll never end in it. So the faith in the world is something very ambiguous, but we would like to try to work with that and propose that as a very important educational concept. Thank you so much for your attention.